Hey, what's going on, y'all? Uh, just wanted to talk about this specific situation that's going on, especially like here in New York. If you guys don't know, New York has had uh, a bit of a spike when it comes to coronavirus cases. And that spike is happening in two areas. It's happening in areas where there are a lot of school districts, and this could be for public schools, charter schools, and private schools. And the other type of area it's happening to is mostly the Orthodox Jewish community. Of course, if any of you guys don't know, Orthodox Jews are essentially the Jewish people who are pretty much where they wear religious clothing year round. Normally wearing black hats, black clothing, white shirts. Their women also wear, black clothing consistently. They do wear other colors here and there, but it's very too far in between. A lot of the richer Jews in those communities tend to be a little bit more flexible in how they wear clothing. Um, but recently, the governor here, that would be Andrew Cuomo, he listed 9 zip codes that he would be rolling back, uh, you know, coronavirus guidelines to make sure that he could put them back into a phase setting. Now, what this means is that he was ordering all non-essential businesses to shut down. They were required to shut down today, and at the same time, he's also requiring schools to be shut down in these districts. And on the school level, that kind of affects like my family because one of my niece is in one of those schools in a district that was shut down. So, with that happening, my niece is now going back to virtual learning, and for a lot of people who are parents, it's they understand they can be frustrated because their child is not in school, especially you don't know what your work situation is like and X, Y, and Z. But it's also extremely frustrating because these schools just opened, and now they have to go back to doing this because of what's going on, and it doesn't have a good sort of frame in terms of like how you're looking at things moving forward. The biggest issue though is now coming to how people feel, especially in the Jewish community, the Orthodox Jewish community, because they are angry at these restrictions. Disregarding the fact that they have some of the highest percentile of cases that are spiking right now, but for many of them they don't care. And for a lot of people, what they don't realize about the Orthodox Jewish community in New York is they're a very segregated group of people. Um, I'll put it to you like this. If if I were to walk a mile, in New York, and I'm just using it as a hypothetical example, if I'm about a half mile in and I hit a Jewish community, that community will exist for about a quarter of a mile, and then you would not see any of them in that last quarter mile. So that's kind of like the way I can kind of put this sort of mindset of how segregated the Jewish community is here in New York. They don't really interact with a lot of people of different religions or, colors of skin, to be honest, unless they're like going to like a brick and mortar store or they're going to a clothing store. I used to have to deal with them a lot in my previous job, just because I worked somewhere that Jewish people liked to go in and shop at. You get a sense of understanding of like who they are. I mean, they're not all of them are dicks. Just the landlords that are this way are kind of dicks. But also the biggest problem that they have is many of them have a very difficult time with people that aren't part of their community telling them what to do. And it dates all the way back to, of course, World War II and everything that happened with the Holocaust. And for many of them, if they feel that you are talking to them, what ends up happening essentially is these people will essentially feel like what you're doing is not an implication on them as far as being people, but them as their religion, which is a bad kind of way to kind of look at this framing. I think the it's a two-sided, discussion to have, mostly because on one side you got a bunch of people who um, they want to be able to do the right things, but they also at the same time prefer not to have outside influence into what's going on. And on the flip side, you also have people who want to be able to give them advice, but realizing that it's not going to get them far. So you have this massive miscommunication between two sides of people who want to essentially be able to do what's normal. But what you end up getting in return is you end up getting situations that happened last night in Borough Park, which is a predominantly Jewish neighborhood, where they were in the street, gathered around in mass numbers, and burning masks and burning PPE, and they beat up people who were trying to tell them differently. Um, and of course, the NYPD didn't make any arrests. They didn't do anything like that because we already know what the NYPD thinks when it comes to different colors of race in New York. Um, but for me and my approach, and granted, this is a little bit controversial, I'm not in the business of telling people what they should do. And I'm also not in the business of trying to force people to see something in my perspective. So that's why I don't think I could ever even think of myself as being some sort of politician, because when you're a politician, you have to be able to talk and reason with people who may not want to talk and reason to you. And I'm just too hard-headed for it. So when I look at, the Orthodox Jewish community and they're like, we are perfectly fine, we don't need to do this, do that, I tell them, do what you want to do. Because if that's how you feel, then worst case scenario, if one of you guys do catch coronavirus and it spreads and it spikes in your neighborhood, then that becomes a you type of problem. It doesn't become a problem where outside influences who were trying to talk to you about this should step in and help, to be honest. If you feel like this is something that you want to do, then take care of it. But the horrible part about all this and how this rational thinking is, it kind of mirrors what happened to this community a couple years ago. And what I mean by that is a couple years back, uh, the Orthodox Jewish community was dealing with a rapid increase of STDs, you know, and many of it happened based on siblings. Like, and I know that's disgusting, but that's what the data was given, you know. And I personally knew, a couple of different physicians who, when you are a physician in those communities, you have to be, of course, really, 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 really strict in terms of things. But I remember one time he was telling me about this 14-year-old girl who was raped, by her brother, and she had syphilis because of it. And it just kind of gives you this horrible sort of way of looking at everything in general. And then you start digging in to see the deeper ties into, what's the data given, how is this affecting community? And you saw just these mass similar cases of young Orthodox Jewish women being taken advantage of by people in their family and contracting sexual transmitted diseases as a result of it. And it took a really long time, and it took them having to suffer through that to kind of put themselves back on the right path. But it gets worse when you have now something like this, which is a pandemic and coronavirus, which can spread easily. You don't have to have sex with somebody to catch coronavirus. You can catch coronavirus just by interacting with somebody. And I would hate for them to go through the same process of going through this the same way that they went through that. But if these people don't want an outside influence, if they don't want to be able to do this, if they don't want to stick by guidelines and restrictions, they should reap what they sow. It's that simple. If this is the path that you want to take, then take it. But you shouldn't be the first people to be up in arms based on the consequences of it. And it's just that simple, you know?